Okay, looks like it's just us so far. We'll give it a minute.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and introduce, okay?
All right, very good.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of Project Virtual Conference 2018. Today we have Bob Tyler with us, and he will be presenting on Project Server On-Premise Does Agile. Before we get started, just want to let you all know that you can use the chat option at the bottom of the screen to chat and ask any questions. Without much further ado, handing it over to Bob.
All right, well, thank you, Shri. As she mentioned, my name is Bob Tyler. I work with Milestone Consulting Group. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but I want to focus on this presentation. This is a companion presentation to one I've done with Microsoft Project on the desktop. And if you're interested in viewing that, there is a recording on Milestone's YouTube channel. You just have to go to Milestone's website, www.milestoneconsultinggroup.com, and click on newsletter, and then there's a link to the YouTube channel. The main difference between that one and this presentation that we're going to do right now is that this one is going to focus on using Project Server. And good news, it's all versions of Project Server from 2010 forward can use these techniques without much modification. There are obviously some small differences, but not really. Microsoft has recently upgraded Project Professional with Office 365 with several Agile features. But what are you gonna do if you're using Project Professional 2016 or 2013 or 2010? And those Agile features are not available in either Project Online or in PWA. So that's why I developed this presentation. We're using slides instead of the live product so that we can avoid any network latency problems. And all of the examples that I'm using were developed with Project Server and Project Professional 2016 on-prem. As Shri mentioned, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat window and I'll address them at the end of the presentation. We have plenty of time, I think, for questions. I also wanted to mention that we'll be awarding one PDU from PMI, and I'll give you that information at the end. So let's go take a look, make sure I've got everything queued up properly. Let's go look at Milestone. We are a solution-focused company. We're focused strictly on PPM. We are a Microsoft PPM Gold partner, one of a handful worldwide. We're also PMI registered education provider. And we have developed a team-driven implementation process. We focus on getting the right personnel with the right skills in the right roles at the right time. I've been managing projects for more than 25 years. I do a lot of educating. I'm the lead educator with Milestone. My contact information is there. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. There's Milestone's website. Go ahead and click on that if you want to get a quick link to our YouTube channel. So let's get started. I tell my clients, tell my clients that Microsoft PPM can be used to manage Agile projects. And this, as you've already seen, is the usual response. And so I repeat that Microsoft PPM can indeed be used to manage Agile projects. And obviously I get a lot of skepticism, and I say, well, now let's back up a minute. If we look at some perspectives, executives, senior leadership are looking for schedules. They're looking for resource requirements. They want to know, when's this project going to be completed? When can they roll it out? When is my lead developer going to be available? Team members, especially Agile team members, they want a working product. They want satisfied customers. And we contend that we can work with both. Microsoft Project Server, it uses a relational database. It actually is a relational database. It's SQL. And with a few configuration and process changes, we can use it to manage an Agile project. And good news, we don't have to do any macros, no custom programming, no add-ins. It's all out of the box. And even better yet, we can do almost all of this in PWA. And that's what we're going to focus on here. So let's say we've got a very simple scenario. I've got a small development department, and today is July 17th, 2017. It's a Monday morning, and we've got a couple Agile projects that are underway. We're using, in this fictitious organization, 2-week sprints. We're using a velocity of 8 story points per sprint. Now, in real life, you might be using 3-week sprints, 4-week sprints. You might be doing 40, 50, 60 story points in any given sprint. But I wanted to keep the numbers very small, simply so that it doesn't get in the way of the education. Let's take a look. I've logged in as a fellow named Scott Bishop. You recognize the PWA background. And we've opened up a project called the Small Device Integration. And it's an Agile project. As I said, we're using 2-week sprints and 8 story points. And let's look at the different bits of information as perceived by different roles. So let's first look at this as if we're a product owner. If we're a product owner, we're definitely going to want to look at the sprint backlog. That's what we got displayed here. Simple view to create in PWA. I should mention that for this demonstration, I didn't do a product backlog, but you can use the same techniques. I figured we'll deal with the sprint backlog. You could easily develop a product backlog and use the same techniques to move from the product backlog to the sprint backlog. So, as a product owner, I'm very interested in looking at those items to be done. We've done our estimates and story points, and you'll notice we've used that standard Fibonacci type pattern. And user story 18, it had a carryover from a prior sprint. That's really common. You may have, as you get into the development, you may have a particular story that you say, oh yeah, we've got a few other things that we need to do. You might have a carryover into the next sprint, maybe even 2, 3, 4, 5 items. So that's, a common situation. And if I were to scroll that view over to the right, there's a column called Sprints Remaining. And the sprints remaining is simply the story points divided by the velocity. And good news, in PWA, it'll automatically roll it up. So I can see that I've got 7.38, really 8 sprints left in this project based on what I know today. Now that may change, and you may notice that at least one of these, well, one on the screen, hasn't been estimated. Well, if I'm a product owner, I'm definitely going to be interested in those stories without story points. These are going to be the items I really want to focus on, especially look at that first one in the list. It's got a high customer priority, but we haven't estimated it yet. So as product owner, that's what I'm going to be very interested in. I'm going to be interested in what I've called the task progress report, which is really a horizontal representation of a Scrum board. In this case, I don't have anything in progress. So I've got not started and finished. Not started, of course, is going to be the backlog of things that are ready to go, things that have been estimated. So as product owner, I'm going to be interested in looking at the project in this way, and I'm going to be talking about epics, I'm going to talk about features, and I'm going to talk about stories. I'm not going to be focusing on the Microsoft project or PWA terminology. Let's switch gears. How's the Scrum Master going to look at this? Well, the Scrum Master, of course, interested in everything the product owner is looking at, but in addition, the Scrum Master has to make sure the work is flowing. There are no impediments. It's his or her job to make sure that this project can move as fast as possible. So we've developed another view, we call it the sprint status. Simply lists all of the sprints and where are they. So I've got sprint 3, sprint 4, and the sprint backlog. And of course, if I scrolled up, I'd get sprints 1 and 2. So I can see all the user stories that were done, all the activities, things like that. As a Scrum Master, I may be the person responsible for maintaining this project schedule in PWA. But I'm a Scrum Master. My skill set is not PWA. It is not Microsoft Project. So how are we going to make it easy for that person to manage? Let's look at one more role, and then we'll see how we can do this. Let's look at this from the Microsoft project manager's perspective. First and foremost, we have to remember that Microsoft Project is a scheduling tool. That's what it does. If I look at the PDP, the project details page that's associated with this project, I can see that Microsoft Project is calculating a finish date. Hey, that's pretty good, because now I have information that I can give to leadership saying, based on what I know today, I'm estimating this project is going to get done early November. And that's a much better answer than, well, the project will be done when it's done. That tends not to fly very well with most senior executives. If I switch over to the schedule PDP, the typical Gantt chart, I just pulled up the task summary in PWA. You'll see that I've modeled this particular example over real life projects that some of our clients are currently doing. They'll often have sequential activities at the very beginning of the project. And they manage those in a very waterfall-like project. And then they'll have some Agile development. I know in pure Agile, you wouldn't have this sequential activity. But that's purity. I'm also relating it to real life. And Microsoft Project is calculating that finish date, or I should say the project server. And the way it does that is this placeholder tasks. This is the key. Let's make this up. Let's say that we looked at this project and we said, you know, there's 90 to 100 story points for this project. Split the difference, so 95 story points. Well, if our velocity is 8, based on history, that's going to mean we got to have 12 sprints. If we're doing two-week sprints, I can now estimate that placeholder task. And in doing so, that lets Microsoft Project, or the project server, calculate a finish date so that I'm meeting some of the expectations of my senior leadership. You'll notice that I'm doing something that I would never do in a critical path project, and that is linking the summary task. But I figure it's okay because everything in that Agile development has to get done before the project is done. We might have many releases in that Agile development, lots of go-lives, but the project can't be completed until all of it's done. If you're in an organization in which you absolutely cannot link summary tasks, that's fine. Link it to the placeholder task. It'll give you the same results. And it'll certainly meet your organization's standards, whatever the PMO has specified. So if I scroll down and look at the bottom part of that Gantt chart, you'll see that I have some monitor and control activities. Those are ongoing from the very beginning to the very end. In addition, I've got some project closure activities. Those are sequential. After the project has ended, I want to wrap it up, maybe gather all the results from the retrospectives and do a formal lessons learned. I also have another technique. You see this activity, this milestone called additional sprint tasks. That's simply a placeholder. I put it at outline level 1 because as we're going to see, if I were simply to add new activities, because many times you have to add new activities, either new user stories or new activities that you want to track time against, the project server will automatically add those new activities at the very bottom of the task list at the outline level of the last one. And so without this milestone, it would have added them right underneath project closure. I don't want that. And so I simply put a milestone there. And then if I do just straight additions on a new view, well, they'll just get piled on underneath. Notice the project information. One of the things I mentioned is that we want to be able to get a resource allocation picture. In Project Server 2016, we can use resource engagements. This is perfect. And I simply set the resource utilization to calculate the resource utilization from the project plan until the date that the Agile activities start, the Agile development. So before then, it's going to use the project plan, so I get an accurate resource allocation picture. And then on May 19th, it switches over to the resource engagement, which I can set up in PWA, which will allocate my resources. In the pure Agile environment, yes, ideal world, developers, team members are allocated 100% to the project. In my experience working with my clients, that rarely happens. Team members are allocated 75%, 60%, sometimes 50%. And so this way, we're getting a good allocation picture so we can tell leadership this is a good picture. You know which resources are consumed and which ones aren't. And I certainly took a baseline before I started the project. Get rid of that laser pointer. Come on. And as a Microsoft project manager, I talk about tasks. And tasks are simply activities, work activities that have to get done. So to recap, as a product owner, I talk about backlogs, epics, features, stories. As a Scrum Master, I use the same terminology. I'm also removing team barriers. And as a Microsoft project user, I focus on tasks and schedules. In Project Server 2016, the only thing that has to be done using Project Professional is setting that allocation to calculate resource utilization. That's the only thing that has to be done. In for example, in Project Server 2010, that was all done in PWA. So you actually would never even have to go to Project Professional. With Project Server 2016, you do have to check that checkbox, and it's only available in Project Professional. Otherwise, everything can be done in PWA. Let's go see how. So I've set up my sprint status. We've seen this. And I've just finished sprint 4. That finished on July 14th. That was Friday. It's Monday morning, July 17th. I'm ready to set up sprint 5. So all I do is go to my backlog, and I'm going to assign specific user stories. Well, obviously, I'm going to pick the high priority ones. So let's change user story 18 carryover and user story 21 carryover and put them into sprint 5. And then I'm going to ungroup the view. And the reason I do that is I want to add sprint 5 planning. I want to add sprint 5 review and retrospective. If I were just to add them at the bottom of the backlog list, then as we saw, Project Server would put them at the end of the task list on the task summary view in PWA. And I really don't want that. I'd like to have them under that Agile development section underneath the placeholder task. PWA and Project Professional, neither one will let you insert into a grouped view. You have to ungroup it, and then you can do an insert. So that's why we do an ungroup. We set up the duration at maybe 2 hours for the planning, half day for the review and retrospective. And you could add any number of tasks you want. You certainly wouldn't add one for the daily stand-up because that's just too short. But maybe you want a task for the product owner to do backlog refinement. Okay, you can certainly add that. You can add as many tasks as you want. But in this case, we just wanted those two. And we set duration at 2 hours for the planning, half day at the review and retrospective. We're going to set them to sprint 5. And very important, we've got a couple custom fields, Agile Task, yes, and Sprint Ready, yes. These are just custom fields developed by the Project Server administrator, which are going to help with all the custom views that we've set up. And so now when I regroup that view, I've got my Sprint 5 all organized with the planning, review, and retrospective, the carryover, and a user story, and all the different user stories that are going to go into this sprint. Now, since the last sprint ended on July 14th, I want to start these on July 17th. Makes sense? At Milestone, we're actually very strict about it. We say never, ever, ever change task start or task finish. It's a bad idea because Microsoft Project puts a constraint on that task, and that's usually not the constraint you want. It does things, it really makes things complicated. So what we did, since we want to schedule these on a specific date, I labeled it work item start date, but behind the scenes, it's the field constraint date. So when I put in July 17th, 2017, it puts a start no earlier than constraint on Sprint 5 planning, which is exactly what I want. I set the review and retrospective to the 28th, because that's going to be the last day of the sprint. And of course, the carryover and user story 21, set them to start on the 17th. I leave the task type for my brand new tasks to fixed units. And there is a reason for it. It comes in when we do tracking. And we'll talk about the fixed duration tasks for those user stories as we kind of see what the whole cycle is. We changed the Agile state, another custom field, to in progress. And we're ready to staff the tasks, identify who's going to work on them. Well, in this view, I just moved the resource names column over. And in PWA, I can simply check the box next to their names. And that's it. Now, if I were to look at the total allocation in Project Professional, they would be hugely over-allocated. But in PWA, because of the resource engagements, they're correctly allocated. So now I'm getting leadership good allocation information. So from here, I would simply save the project. I could look at the task progress, that horizontal scrum board. Now I've got some items in progress. Good communication vehicle. Publish it. I'm done. Let's fast forward. 2 weeks. We're at the end of the sprint. Today's Friday, July 28th. And in many organizations, they want everybody to track time. Well, how do I say I completed 2 story points today? I mean, that doesn't make sense. In this fictitious organization, we're going to track time on a timesheet. Very common. We could also do % complete tracking if that's what your organization does. But you'll notice that Bradley Beck is working on, he's not working on the small device integration project, which we just set up. This is another one that's also in flight, the Customer Information System Update project. And he just records his time that he actually spends working on this task. He records actual time in the review and retrospective, and then standard PWA, he turns in his final timesheet. Obviously, he'd fill in the rest of it to get it to add up to 40 hours. And the project manager going to the approval center in PWA, again, very standard procedure, standard process, could review all of the submissions from all the team members for this customer information project. And so then he or she can check them all and accept them. And the project server is going to apply those updates to the project plan. Standard process. Well, looks what it's done. Sprint planning, review and retrospective, those finish dates are good. But user story 8 and user story 9 carryover got pushed out beyond the end of the sprint. What are we going to do about that? That can be a problem. Because I certainly don't want to change that finish date, because first of all, milestone, we say don't do that. And second of all, it'd back up the start date. Don't want that either. Well, we developed another view. We call it the sprint closeout view. And in the sprint closeout view, you set remaining work to 0 and set the task type to fixed units. When you do that, the project server will actually adjust the finish date for you. So this way, we make sure that there is no work scheduled in a prior period. Again, very important. And the tasks are actually marked complete. I can then set the state to be finished. And so now when I go to the task progress report, the Scrum board, everything in Sprint 3 is now done. If your project only has Agile development, you're done. You're ready to set up for the next sprint. And you're getting good metrics. People are filling out timesheets just like everybody else, but you're capturing that information. And you can start, it can give you valuable metrics so you can start building a process for good estimation for future projects. There is a task burn down. It's native in Project Professional 2016 and 2013, but it is task burn down. It's not story point burn down. We just recommend to our clients they can export the information to Excel and then use the graphing capabilities of Excel. But you probably remember, we have a little more complicated situation. We've got non-agile tasks here. We've got those monitor and control tasks. We've got project closure tasks. And you can see that right now, it's the project management that's driving the finish date of the project. I don't know about you, I'm not going to go to my boss and say, yeah, we're going to get development done on November 14th, but I need 3 more days of project management, and then we'll be done. I don't think that's going to fly very well. So what do we do about that? Well, I mentioned we never ever change task start or task finish, but assignment finish is okay. If you reset the assignment finish date, you notice I've got baseline finish, the baseline finish column inserted here. If I insert or reset the assignment finish date, then Microsoft Project will reset the task finish. So I'm correcting all those little individual assignments, and then my task finish gets adjusted automatically. So in this project, I'm now done with Sprint 3. And I've made sure that there is no work scheduled in prior periods. If I look at the sprint backlog, let's kind of take a quick recap because I do want to leave some time for questions. Let's say I have to split a task. We start estimating user story 15, and we realize it's going to end up with 21 story points. So I decide, you know, I'm going to split it into 3. One user story with 8, another one with 8, and the third one with 5. Well, that's pretty easy. We've seen all we have to do is ungroup the view, and then I can do an insert so they all stay together, and then regroup it. One of the key things, remember that custom field that I mentioned called Agile Task. By setting it to yes, then the predefined filters, again in the views set up by the project server administrator, will go ahead and keep them in the sprint backlog. We set the occurs when, which is really the constraint type, to as late as possible. This is very important. If I had it as soon as possible, which is the default, then I would end up with all these user stories, and they're scheduled at the beginning of my Agile development. I don't want that. I want it all out in the future. So by setting it to as late as possible, it gets pushed out into the future. I make the task type fixed duration. Why? So that I can set the duration to the length of the sprint. And I don't have to worry about work, units, duration and peak. It makes that planning a lot easier. You notice that when we closed out the sprint, we changed the task type to fixed units and set remaining work to 0 so that so the project server would properly close out that, that particular activity. So that's how we can add tasks. And then on the sprints remaining, remember, it's simply based on what we know. As we add more and more estimates and get better and better user story counts, then I can tell by looking at that sprints remaining, are we going to hit our end date? If it says that we've got 12 sprints remaining and we're doing 2-week sprints, I'd better look. Is our finish date before that 24-week end date? If it is, we're in trouble. I need to do something. I definitely need to let leadership know that we've got an issue. But you're doing it 24 weeks in advance. How good is that? That is very good project management. If I need to remove a story from an existing sprint, well, that's easy. Just undo everything we did. Take it out of the sprint, put it in the backlog. Maybe reset the occurs when, because maybe you would set a date to it. Very easy. So in summary, we start out by defining custom fields. These are ones the project server administrator defines for the server for the entire enterprise. It's easy to do. You just figure out which ones you need. Define your custom views. Again, a very easy process, but the project server administrator has to do it. Define any of your special reporting needs. During planning, estimate the duration of the development. That's key, because that gives us that placeholder task, which is going to drive out the finish date. Make sure the last task in the schedule is at outline level 1, just so the tasks line up. They don't end up into the underneath some summary task. And use the resource engagements to determine resource allocation. And absolutely, take a baseline. Make sure that you know what your original plan was. During project execution, you're going to use a sprint setup view, very similar to what we did. You're going to track progress, and you're going to perform sprint closeout. And if all you're doing is agile development, you're done. You just repeat those steps over and over again. But if you have some non-agile tasks, like those monitor and control activities that we had, well, you've got to manage those. But again, they're relatively straightforward. So we've taken about 50 minutes, 45 minutes, and we've seen absolutely Microsoft PPM can be used to manage agile projects. Before I go to question and answer, I do want to give you that PMI information. It's on the screen now. We did get it registered through PMI, so if you're looking for PDUs, it's one technical PDU. And I'm going to pull down the controls. Shri, do we have some questions in the chat window. I don't see any.
Um,
Have you seen any?
Hello, Bob. Yeah, I don't see any either.
Okay. Well, I see we still have a couple people who are still there.
Mm-hmm.
Do either of you have any questions, any comments, any concerns? Well, I guess, Sri, we're going to have to assume not.
That is true.
Well, thank you, Ted. I appreciate it. As I said, if I've used these same techniques with Microsoft Project on the desktop. And so I would recommend go out to our website, and in the upper right-hand corner, there's a newsletter hyperlink, and that'll take you to our newsletter page. And on the right side of that is a link to the YouTube channel. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. And depending on your time zone, enjoy your morning, your evening, or the middle of the day.
Well, thank you, guys. We appreciate Bob, you presenting in with such good information. And I'm going to end the meeting if you guys are okay.
I am good with it. Ted, Percy, any last questions? Okay, well, thank you, Sri. I appreciate all your help in getting this organized.
Oh, thank you, Bob. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Percy, for attending this session. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.